Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition. We now turn to poem 217, Savior, I've No One Else to Tell. Now, this is a fascinating poem, and in fact, this poem will explain why we have called our studies Chats with Emily. There seems to be, and now that we are to poem 217 of the 1,775 total poems of the Johnson edition. If you've been reading along with us, and that's kind of our assumption here, is that you've been working with us at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through the preceding 216 poems. We just finished with the famous 216, Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers. If you've already done this reading to this point, you know that one of the things that often is treated is this longing to tell, longing to speak, longing to be understood, we might say. And certainly we're going to see this happening in this poem. Now, this is a somewhat disputed poem. It is a poem, another poem sent to Sue, but it's not altogether clear who the poem is actually for, who it is referencing. Many have understood this as one of the famous master poems or comments on the master. There is a number of scholars who actually see this as being a poem about Reverend Charles Wentworth. Now, this is fascinating. In 1860, Wentworth visited Emily in Amherst. He was the pastor at the Arch Street Church, Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. And some people believe that she might have met him in 1855. When she stopped there on coming back from Washington in one of her few trips away from Amherst. And he did give apparently some spiritual counsel, which she might have mistaken for love by Emily, at least. And there's a lot of mystery that will surround this kind of thing. None of the correspondence between these two survive, which is really, really sad. In April of 62, Wadsworth will leave Philadelphia. He goes out to Calvary Church in San Francisco, California, and there is some talk that this lyric, this set of lines, is right around this time when Emily might have had some sense about the departure that was about to happen, and it might be, in fact, referenced here. Notice how the poem can be read like a prayer. I have said that Emily's reading of biblical text stands behind a whole bunch of what's going on in her poetry. And especially, I think, her study of the book of Psalms. And you're going to see in a number of these poems that we will call poems of anxiety, poems of longing, poems of disclosure, to tell, that they sound a lot like, for example, Psalm 13. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? You'll remember the psalmist writing these kinds of longings to be understood, longings to be noticed, longings to be appreciated. Notice all the H sounds in this poem as well as we get ready to read it, especially in the final lines. The H sounds seeming to almost like exhibit this kind of anxiety that she will be playing with. Now, the use of the word Savior here is going to be fascinating. Many will reference it as Christ. Many will reference it as someone else. Let's enjoy the poem to try and understand what's going on. Notice it's Savior with an exclamation point. Savior, I've no one else to tell, and so I trouble thee. I am the one forgot thee so. Dost thou remember me? Nor for myself I came so far, that were the little load. I brought thee the imperial heart I had not strength to hold. The heart I carried in my own, till mine too heavy grew. Yet strangest, heavier since it went, is it too large for you? Now, notice the poem is broken up into two questions. Note your question marks. You can circle them to notice the way the poem is divided that way. Notice the use of the word Savior with an exclamation point. Now again, many will assume we're speaking here of Christ. Her use of this word Savior is fascinating. When we get to poem 256, it will read like this. If I'm lost now that I was found, shall still my transport be that once on me those jasper gates blazed open suddenly, that in my awkward gazing face the angels softly peered and touched me with their fleeces, almost as if they cared. I'm banished now. You know it, how foreign that can be. You'll know, sir, when the Savior's face turns so away from you. We'll get this use of the word Savior in 286, 313, 444, 461, 1111, 1347, and then finally she'll use it one more time in poem 1487, and it will read like this. The Savior must have been a docile gentleman to come so far so cold a day for little fellowmen. The road to Bethlehem since he and I were boys was leveled, but for that 'twould be a rugged billion miles. It isn't altogether clear, as we have said many times already in our study, what is Emily's relationship with the Savior. Some have, of course, posited that this word Savior is referencing Master or some other. Notice she'll begin by saying, Savior. We'll assume that it is in fact Christ she's speaking to. I've no one else to tell. Now again, sounding very much like a number of the Psalms I mentioned, Psalm 13. And this idea of I need to tell is what led us to call this series Chats with Emily. And so, because I've got no one else, I trouble thee. Notice the italicized. I am the one forgot thee so. In other words, it's almost as if she's saying, I have forgotten for quite some time that I could turn to you in prayer, but now I will. And then she'll ask the first of two questions, dost thou remember me? It is a compelling question. And if you're reading this poem as her asking the Master, do you still remember me? It kind of makes some sense. Or, I've been forgotten by everybody, she might seem to be suggesting, including even God. Nor, for myself I came so far. Notice you're going to have things about size and distance and weight all the way through the rest of this poem now. In other words, it seems to suggest that I'm actually advocating on behalf of someone else, and this is where speculation about who it is that she is referencing starts to happen. Nor for myself I came so far, that were the little load. Now, I've already told you guys, her use of the word little is ubiquitous. 172 different poems, she'll use this word. She thought of herself as being little. The little load, I brought thee the imperial heart I had not strength to hold. Now, this is fascinating, this imperial heart thing. In letter 233 to quote-unquote Master, Emily wrote this. God built the heart in me. By and by, it outgrew me, and like the little mother with the big child, I got tired holding him. Now, the scholar Judith Farr has pointed out that you can't read much of this part of Emily Dickinson's life without appreciating her love of Jane Eyre, Bronte's Jane Eyre, and more particularly the dream child sequence. We'll not get into it. We've given lectures on Jane Eyre at learnstrong.net if you're interested. In letter 2.405, she says it this way, the heart wants what it wants. And so her use of the word heart, it's an interesting word to run to ground when we're reading all of these poems. She says, I brought thee the imperial heart. By the way, notice this repetition of thee, and of course the last word is you. I had not strength to hold. In other words, it seems as if she's suggesting that whatever it was she wanted to hold got away from her. And this is the reason why she's now coming to Savior. The heart I carried in my own, which obviously sounds somewhat romantic. Again, notice all these H sounds from heart to hold to heart to heavy to heavier. This language of anxiety, some have called it. The heart I carried in my own till mine too heavy grew. It's almost as if she's saying, I tried to hold on and I held on for as long as I could and then I just had to let it go. Yet, she says, strangest, it's as if she's trying to figure it out herself, heavier since it went. In other words, as heavy as my heart was when I was trying to hold it, it was even more heavy when it went. And again, Wadsworth in his travelings out to San Francisco, some have speculated, is what she's referencing here. Is it too large for you? Now, the antecedent for the pronoun it here, right, would be obviously the heart, but it's not altogether clear which heart she's referencing here. And her question, it seems, is, can I lay this on you? Or is it in fact even too difficult for you? Now again, depending on who you think Savior is, she sent the poem to Sue, as we've said. Some have referenced Savior as possibly Sue. What do you think is actually going on here at 2a? Well, obviously she's speaking about some sense of rejection, some sense of the, can we just say translinguistic, the impossibility of sharing what it is she has to tell. And of course, these poems that she writes is often going to be the only mechanism whereby she can actually tell, chat. And to be, I mentioned all the H sounds, of course, the two questions and then the provocative last question, because of course, nothing is too heavy for God and all of that. Of course, there's always been that kind of quasi-joke in theology. God can do anything, really. Can God create a rock that God cannot lift? This seems to be kind of playing that. Is it possible maybe it's even too heavy for you? Finally, at 3a, I mentioned the Psalms of anxiety, and especially Psalm 13. I think you can go back and read the Psalms, and read especially some of those Psalms of David, where he is imploring God, will you just hear me? Will you just listen? Are you there? And I think a number of poems of Emily Dickinson can be read this way. Finally, at 3b, when was a time, how to own a poem like this, what was a time that you felt like this? What was a time that you felt maybe lost? Maybe you felt like you had a heavy heart. And what was a time when you had no one you could tell, you longed to be able to tell someone, and maybe Emily will make you know that you're not alone in that feeling. Thank you.